Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. What if you only knew your mother through a photograph? What if she had left you but promised to come back? And what if it had stretched to 11 or 12 years? The boy in this episode that we're going to talk about reunited with his mother and took matters into his own hands. The story is phenomenal. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Sonia Nazario, author of Enrique's Journey, the story of a Honduran boy's odyssey to be reunited with his mother, who had moved to the U.S. for work. Sonia's writing on this topic has won dozens of awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing. Welcome, Sonia.
Thank you, Shirley.
This is a book that has changed my life and understanding about the illegal immigration that happens in the United States. It's put a face, it's put a story to this whole situation that I think Americans are going to have to care more and more about. And the unique thing about this book was how determined this young man was to get to America after having not known his mother for about 11 years, correct?
That's right. His mother leaves him when he's just 5 years old in Honduras. And this is really the story of changing face of immigration to the United States, where there are these millions of single mothers who have come here from Central America and Mexico, and they leave their kids behind with a promise, I'll be back in 1 or 2 years max. But the difficulties in the United States, this stretches out into 5 or 10 years, and these kids who have been apart from their mothers for so long, like this boy's, despair of seeing their moms again and say, I'm going to go find her.
But what do you think drove him, after 11 years, to risk his life? And we're going to talk about that. Risk his life to be reunited with his mother. What drove that?
He wants to know if his mother still loves him. I mean, on the most fundamental level, she said she was coming back in a year or two, or she would send for him with a smuggler, and she's not able to. And although she writes and she phones and she sends money so that he can study past the 3rd grade, which is all she was able to do, so he can eat more than once a day. I mean, this was a horrific decision for her, for any parent, to separate themselves from their child so that they can eat, so that they can study. But a child doesn't understand that. What a child wants is their mother by their side, no matter what. He and all these kids will tell you, I'd rather go hungry but have my mother there with me. And so he sets off to the north to find her with little more than this tiny scrap of paper with her phone number in North Carolina. He doesn't know where the United States is. He has no idea. But he's going to go find her because he wants to know, does my mother love me?
And he does this by riding the rails, the top of trains, doesn't he? And he tries to do this 8 times.
There are thousands and thousands of these children each year who set off for the north to find their mothers, and because they have no money, they go the only way they can, which is clinging to the tops of these freight trains that head up the length of Mexico. And there are bandits who operate alongside the rails who rob them and rape them and beat them and sometimes kill them. There are corrupt cops who do much the same and deport them south to the southern border of Mexico. They have to get on and off the trains as they're moving, and many of them lose limbs and their lives to the train. They call it el tren de la muerte, the train of death, and it really is. They have to run this gauntlet to be able to try to get through Mexico, try to get to the U.S.-Mexico border, and try to reach their mothers in the United States.
And time after time they endure this because they get to some place, they get identified, they get sent back to Honduras, and then they try it all over again.
That's right, because the Central American Americans are coming through Mexico illegally. Here in the United States, we tend to think that the hardest part for immigrants is crossing the U.S.-Mexico border.
Right.
But the Central Americans will tell you that the really tough part is getting through Mexico. And they're really hunted down like animals all along the way by this whole host of characters in Mexico.
And why does Mexico feel so antagonistic if the end journey is the United States?
Well, Mexico deports about 200,000 Central Americans per year.
Wow.
And they do it because as part of an unspoken policy of helping the United States, you know, we'll keep these folks out of the United States if you treat Mexicans trying to come into the United States better.
Okay.
So that's been kind of the way it's gone for the last many years.
So Mexico also has a problem with illegal immigrants because it's probably a drain on their systems as well. I mean,
well, yes, you see Central Americans working in agriculture in southern Mexico. Many
right.
Guatemalans come in. But mostly it's a country that immigrants are trying to traverse to get to the United States. And so many Mexicans question the policies of Mexico and say, you know, you want Mexicans to be treated well who are trying to come into the U.S. illegally, then why are we treating Central Americans this way? And some would say more horribly than the United States does, because most Central Americans would take a U.S. Border Patrol agent over
okay.
immigration authorities in Mexico and how they're treated in Mexico any day.
Okay. And how long does it take to get from Honduras to the Mexican border for the U.S.?
Well, the boy I write about, Enrique, it takes him 122 days and 8 attempts, and he travels a total of 12,000 miles, just to give you a sense of what these immigrant children are willing to do. And that's what I hope to convey, not only to humanize immigrants
right.
in the book, but to convey the determination of people to make it to the United States. I think people who talk about building walls don't understand this level of determination on a cellular level. Americans don't really get, you know, that people are willing. I saw people who had lost legs and arms to the train who healed somewhat and would get back on that train and would continue north. I don't think many Americans understand that.
Right, so it's not just going to be a taller wall or more border patrol. We're going to have to impact the countries from which they come, aren't we?
Well, what a lot of people along the rail say is that politicians have been feeding us 3 solutions for decades now, either an amnesty
right.
or greater border enforcement or
right.
a guest worker program, and that all 3 approaches, the studies show, have only led to increasing levels of illegal immigration. And what people along the rail say is that you have to attack this at its source in terms of the poverty that's right. driving people really out of only 4 or 5 countries that send about 80% of the people who come to the United States illegally.
Right. We were talking about this as a group at the college here, and we said, what are the solutions? And it seemed like economic development, that the poverty was the driving force, and that if you didn't impact poverty in that home state, people would still seek. And in fact, it's an admirable quality, right? It's an admirable quality to want to better yourself. And if you can't do it in your home state, in some ways these are heroes because they have done everything they could in order to make a life better for themselves or their children. Like the woman in this story, the mother is Lourdes. She comes, she has her own pain, right, of leaving her children.
Absolutely. I mean, she's tried everything to be able to feed these children. Her husband has left her for another woman, and she's trying to feed these kids. She goes door to door selling clothing. She sells cigarettes and gum from a dusty sidewalk in the capital of Honduras. And she can only feed these kids once or twice a day. She can never buy them a toy, never buy them a birthday cake. And she can see that they're going to have to drop out of school in the 3rd grade to help her survive. And like any parent, you know, she wants better than that. So many of these women talk to me about how their children would cry with hunger at night, right. and their cupboards were bare, and they would fill this big glass with water with a little teaspoon of sugar and mix it in and give that to them to try to fill their bellies.
Right. Right.
And I wanted parents here in the United States to think about, you know, what would you do if you were faced with such a choice? If you knew that you had this option of coming to the United States, You knew it was illegal. You knew it was wrong. But your kids were hungry at night.
It's a devil's
what
choice.
Would you do? That's right. And I think many Americans might make the same choice, particularly since the United States has had really a schizophrenic policy on immigration. On the one hand, we say, don't come, and we put Border Patrol agents at the U.S.-Mexico border. But on the other hand, we've had an open policy of hiring illegal immigrants in this country, and many companies welcoming them as cheap, compliant workers.
That's right. Now, this story, with all its complexities, which was one of the beauties of this book, is it showed there aren't three simple answers, but it's a very, very complex situation. You decided that you needed to actually ride the rails in order to change what was a series of newspaper articles into this Pulitzer Prize-winning book. What did your family say when you said, I am going to ride the rails?
Well, they thought I was a little crazy.
Right? Yes.
But I had talked to Enrique, this boy who I met in northern Mexico, as he was on his journey. Right. And he was on his 8th attempt, and he told me about everything he had been through during these 3 months, how he had nearly been killed by there are gangsters who control the tops of the trains, and they go car to car, 10 or 20 of them, armed with knives and bats and even guns, and they will strip you of your clothing and try to find the coins that you have hidden in your clothing, and they're hopped up on crack cocaine, and sometimes just for the heck of it, throw you down to the churning wheels below.
Just because they can.
Just because they can. And but I really wanted to understand what this journey was like for these thousands of kids, some of them as young as 7 years old,
that
who
is
come
unbelievable.
alone, traversing 4 countries alone in their incredible yearning to be with their mothers again. I wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand the dangers, and I wanted to take people on top of these trains. It really is a whole different world there. And so I decided, well, I have to do it myself. And so I asked Enrique everything he had been through on those 3 months, and I went back to Honduras, and I did the journey step by step, just as he had a few weeks before. So I ended up riding on top of 7 freight trains through 2/3 of Mexico.
Now,
and it was
harrowing.
It was harrowing. There's no other way to put it. I had times when, a branch almost swiped me off the train and I felt like I was going to die. I had times when a gangster lunged at me and I had to hop forward 3 cars to escape from him. When I came back, I had this recurring nightmare that a gangster was running after me on top of the train, trying to rape me, and I had to go into therapy to deal with that. But I think what most amazed me was that despite what I went through, it was 1 iota of what these kids go through. Because I got off the train every time. I went to a motel. I slept in a bed. And kids like Enrique, they're sleeping out in the elements. They're trying to beg for any food
you had
they can
food,
get.
you had money for food, you had a cell phone, you had made some preparations, people knew that you were coming through, but you didn't want to change the experience so much so that you didn't have an authentic experience, but you had to have some safety nets as a journalist to write this story. The point was to get the story out.
Right, but it really showed me what I saw on those trains and what I show in my book, really the gritty determination of people to make it through Mexico, to reach the United States. When you have such a huge difference in income from Honduras, where you make $3 to $5 a day, and you can make 10 times that in one day in the United States or more, until that is addressed to some degree, and you lessen those differences, people will risk their lives by the millions to come here.
When you were in this journey of 3.5 months, what kept you going when the going got so tough?
Just wanting to tell the story as best as I could with every detail of what it's like on top of those trains. The harrowing aspects, but also the wonderful aspects of the train, the camaraderie of there's a lot of terrible things that happen on the trains, but there's also in the central part of Mexico, people, when they hear the whistle of the train, there are people who rush out of their homes in these these small towns, and they 10 or 20 of them with these bundles of food in their arms, and they'll wave and they'll smile and they'll shout out to the people on top of the train, and they throw bread and tortillas and bottles of water, and if they have nothing to give, they come out and they give a silent prayer as people pass by.
I could not believe that in the book. So as I'm reading the story, it seems just endless, and it's over and over and over. And I know that had to be part of your writing style to say, look, you don't get over this quickly. It is over and over and over again, trying in the middle. And then there would be like the sun opening up. And this would be a village who would say, we care about you, we love you. And for the people riding on the train, for the immigrants riding on the train, it was a miracle, wasn't it?
It is a miracle. I mean, you've really, the southern part of Mexico is really the heart of darkness. Most of these kids and migrants have been beaten and robbed several times before they even get out of that first state in southern Mexico. Right. And you know, they flinch as anyone approaches them. And then suddenly, as they're in this state of Veracruz in south central right. Mexico, these people rush out and they give because, and these are, you know, what's most amazing is these are the poorest Mexicans. They live along the rails. Right. They make $1 a day. They can barely feed their own kids tortillas and beans, but they give because they believe this is the Christian thing to do. Right. This is the right thing to do. This is what Jesus Christ would do. And they've seen the suffering up close of these right. people. They've seen people fall off the trains from hunger, from not eating 5 days in a row. And so they come out, and I mean, I remember in particular this one woman who claimed to be over 100 years old, and her hands were gnarled with age, and she would force them to make these little bags with tortillas and beans, so when they heard the whistle of the train, her 70-year-old daughter could run down this rocky slope and throw these bags up to the migrants on the train. And she said, if I have one tortilla, I'll give half away. Yeah, well, I know God will bring me more.
Well, that is the gospel message, but to see it lived out so concretely was such a
I've
witness.
Never seen people live their faith like I saw in the state of Veracruz. But you know, I think people in the United States also have that compassion for the immigrant, for the right. traveler. Mm-hmm. And they're torn because they see the negative effects of illegal immigration. But there is that compassion, yes. and many of us know these women that I write about, like Enrique's mother Lourdes. They clean our homes, they clean our offices, they take care of our children. Right. And so they understand on that level, wanting to reach out to people who have so much less. I mean, I feel blessed by sheer luck, having been born in this amazing country right. and everything that brings. And I think a part of Americans want to share a little bit yes. of that, but they want people to come here legally.
Now, when you were in this journalistic adventure, you had a cell phone, as we said, and you watched Enrique wanting to call his mother and gather up the pennies that it would take to get a phone card, and yet you had your cell phone in your pocket. How and why did you make the decision not to help him out with your cell phone, and why was that the journalistically right decision?
Well, when Enrique is on top of the trains, he's nearly beaten to death by these thugs, the gangsters on top of the train, and they strip off his clothing, including the little scrap of paper he left with his mother's phone number.
He ultimately memorizes it.
He ultimately, but he hasn't by the time he got to northern Mexico. So he's got to try to call the one phone number he remembers in Honduras, where he's from, to get her phone again and hopefully continue on his journey to be with his mother. Right. And so he's saving, and he's got to come up with 100 pesos, about $10. And I watch him struggle through 2 weeks of this. He's eating once a day. He's sleeping on the banks of the Rio Grande, exposed to the elements. Yes. And I have a cell phone in my purse. Journalists try to report a story as it plays out. We try to report reality. Had I given him my cell phone, I would have fundamentally changed his story. Right. I could have done that, but then I couldn't have used his story. I would have had to start over. And I didn't feel that he was in imminent danger, so I didn't do that. With other children along the way who I met, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old girl who had just been raped, I felt that their lives were in imminent danger, and I did intervene. And I didn't use anything after that as a reporter in terms of their story. But our goal is to convey reality as powerfully as possible. And so I was watching his life play out, and it was the most difficult thing of that journey for me, not intervening and not helping more kids along the way.
One of the things that you maybe hope for when you read this book is, oh, there'll be a happy ending. Enrique will be reunited with his mother. It will be okay. And the reality is that it's not okay when they relocate or when they reunify. In fact, there's anger, there's immense love, there's conflict. Basically, their lives are very different from each other, and they have to reunify. What did you find with Enrique and his mother? What was their story when they got back together again?
Well, he's, like most of these kids, he's really idealized his mother. He has all these problems, not surprisingly, in Honduras without his mother by his side. And so he thinks that reaching her will be his salvation. And when he gets there, you know, there's this brief honeymoon, as there is for so many of these children. But then the kids say, you know, you said you were going to come back in 1 or 2 years. What happened? You abandoned me. And they are angry and even walk up to the line of hatred towards their mothers for leaving them and say, I would have rather been hungry and not had all those toys you sent me, the money to eat, been able to study, but had my mother by my side. They're tough on their moms. They say things like, even a dog doesn't leave its litter.
Right.
And so really what was saddest to me was that these women lose what's the most important thing, which is the love of their children. And this has huge social implications because these kids are now in these conflicted homes, and the boys try to find that love they thought they were going to finally find with their mother with the gang, or the girls get pregnant with an older guy to get out of those houses. And so a disproportionate number of children in gangs, both in Central America and here in the United States, come from these homes where you've had this kind of separation and then reunification. And so really the goal is to keep more of these women in their home countries with jobs there, with their children by their side. That's the goal. And many people along the rails believe that if the United States really had a foreign policy, it really put its heart into this, centered around the issue of illegal immigration, that with trade policies and aid and a variety of things that really providing small microloans to women in some of these countries. There's a whole host of things that the United States could do as part of a foreign policy that would help create more jobs so more of these women will stay home. These women don't want to come here. Immigrants don't want to leave their countries. They want to stay at home with their language and their culture and their family and everything they know.
One of the different aspects was helping us understand through this book what we can support as Americans here. What would you think we should be doing as people who want to have some activism based on your book?
Well, I think what most people along the rails say is that you need to focus on what will work.
Okay.
And what will work is creating jobs in these countries.
So be involved with our legislature, our Congress people.
In terms of saying, you know, you say that border enforcement will reduce this flow. But we've tripled the number of Border Patrol agents and money along the border, spent along the border. And we have the National Guard there now. And what's happened is that the rate of illegal immigration has only grown more quickly, because if before people came, and in 1986, half of Mexicans who came, within a year they went home. Now less than a quarter do, because they think it's going to, the smuggling rates have gone up, it's gotten more expensive, they think it's going to get tougher to get into this country in the future.
So they don't want to go back and forth.
And they stay.
Right.
And then they bring up their families and friends illegally. And so it's created a growth in illegal immigration, the opposite of what politicians are telling you. And the same is true with an amnesty, which more liberal elements in the United States advocate, or a guest worker program, which really created the foundation for the huge wave of illegal immigration that followed in the 50s and 60s. So what people say is, don't buy what the politicians are telling you about what has been tried in the past and we simply have to do more of. You need to deal with creating jobs. If you create jobs, you know, these Honduran women say, Honduras doesn't have to be the United States. If they can feed their kids, if they can send their kids to school, if they even have the hope of sending them to school past the 3rd grade, they would stay in their countries. They wouldn't separate from their children.
But this assumes that Honduras is interested in American intervention in this way. Is there any likelihood that the Honduran government wants to have an American plan for their country?
Well, that's part of the problem, because when people come here, they send huge amounts of money, $45 billion per year.
That's right.
Back to Latin America.
Right.
This is the 2nd source of income in Mexico right now. It's huge. And so these governments have been promoting illegal immigration to the United States. So,
because it's a huge economy just to get all of these dollars back into their economies.
That's right.
So they're conflicted out.
They're conflicted as well, but we have to try to convince them that it's in their self-interest to work with us to try to reduce this flow. And for example, trade policies. When I was in Honduras, there was a factory that made medical scrubs for the U.S. market, and that factory was about to shut down because the U.S. buyers could get those scrubs a few cents cheaper from China.
Right.
And what people there said, well, if you know that Honduras is the #2 sending country of illegal immigrants to the United States, why don't you let in more scrubs from Honduras than anywhere else? I mean, I think there are a lot of things Americans could do, that our politicians could do, that Congress could do, if we really set our minds to it. But what people there believe is that really Latin America has been ignored pretty much since the Kennedy administration, that our sights have been elsewhere.
And the Honduran government knows that the breakdown of their family units will ultimately cause even greater problems.
That's right.
So there is some motivation for them.
There is definitely motivation.
My guest today has been Sonia Nazario, author of Enrique's Journey, the story of a boy's odyssey to reunite with his mother. And I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.